Blood dripped down Ariana Brooks's lip as the courtroom froze. A white cop had just shoved the black defense attorney to the floor in front of a stunned judge and jury. But what no one in that room knew was that Ariana wasn't just any lawyer. She was the federal judge's daughter. How far would justice go when family, race, and power collide under the same roof? If this moment made your heart race, hit like and share this story, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Let's step inside the courtroom. I was there that morning, front row of the press bench, coffee cooling in my palm, when the air inside the federal courthouse in Atlanta turned heavy enough to taste. Autumn light poured through those thick windows and laid a hard shine on every face that walked in. No soft edges, no place to hide. Ariana Brooks came down the aisle slow, like each step had a purpose. 35 black trim gray suit that didn't ask permission from anybody. In her left hand, she held a small silver pendant, an old piece scuffed at the edges. She pressed her thumb to it once, the way folks do when they're steadying their breath. I'd seen cops smooth their badges like that. I'd seen mothers touch folded prayer cards. Same ritual, different wars. Across the room stood Sergeant Damon Harlow, 40, something white broad as a freezer. Navy uniform fitted to a body that lived in the gym jaw, locked like a vice. He didn't bother to pretend. He looked Ariana up and down the way men look at a car they don't think belongs in their neighborhood. The young defense lawyer at his side, slick hair, pale face, wore a smile built for press conferences and acquittals. The case on paper was simple. Ariana represented a young black man who left a holding cell with a cracked rib and a story that matched a dozen others. Damon was the arresting officer. I'd heard this song before. So had the jury, even if they wouldn't admit it. So had Judge Marcus Ellington, calm on the bench, eyes the color of winter stone. The clerk called the room to order. Papers shuffled, chairs creaked the chorus of ritual. Ariana rose. No throat clearing, no flattery to the court. "May it please the court," she began, voice low, clean, professional, the kind of voice that doesn't waste anyone's time. She set her legal pad on the lectern, and for a second her thumb grazed that pendant again. Damon cut across her. "You people always twist the law to play the victim." I felt every muscle in that room lock up. Someone snorted. Someone else muttered a curse. A juror's lips pulled tight. The young attorney at Damon's elbow didn't stop him. He didn't need to. The words were meant to bleed and run. Ariana didn't look at the jury, didn't look at me, didn't look at the court reporter whose fingers had frozen above the keys. She kept her eyes on Damon like they were holding a line between two cliffs. When she spoke, the sound hardly rose, but it traveled everywhere. "I don't raise my voice for men who mistake silence for weakness." It was a clean hit, not loud. True. The kind of line that lands because it doesn't try to. A murmur cracked open along the back row. One juror's pen stopped scratching. Damon's face ticked just a hair, like a man who'd been nudged a little off his mark and didn't like the feeling. Judge Ellington lifted the gavel and brought it down once. "Counselors, you will let each other finish." His tone was even the way good judges keep gasoline away from sparks. But for a beat too long, his eyes held on Ariana's face, long enough for me to notice, and long enough for him to remember it wasn't wise. Then the curtain dropped behind his stare again. Ariana turned a page. "Your Honor, the evidence will show excessive force applied without lawful cause, followed by falsified reports to conceal that force." She didn't sell it, she stated it, as if the facts themselves deserved the respect of a straight spine. Damon shifted shoulders, rolling under the fabric. He wasn't used to sharing the ground with anyone, least of all a black woman who didn't flinch. He whispered something to his lawyer, too low to catch, but you could read the shape of confidence on his mouth. It said, "I've been here before." It said, "We always win." Beside me, a deputy adjusted his belt. On the opposite aisle, a woman in a church hat folded her arms and leaned forward like she'd been waiting years to hear someone say exactly what Ariana had said. I wrote a single note on my pad, tone like a scalpel. Ariana kept moving. She described the stop, the handcuffs, the cell, the missing footage from a camera that should never have blinked. She didn't crowd the timeline. She let the gaps indict themselves. When she stepped away from the lectern to enter an exhibit, Damon tracked her like a predator clocking distance. "You people," he muttered again, softer now, as if he needed to feed himself the words to stay hungry. "Sergeant," his lawyer warned, barely opening his lips. Ariana returned to the lectern. The pendant flashed once near her palm and went still. "The law is not a badge," she said, not to Damon, not to the jury, almost like she was reminding the room of something it had known before it forgot. "It's an obligation." A cough. A chair leg scraped. Somewhere behind me, a camera shutter clicked, then thought better of it. The judge's clerk shot us a look that made every reporter tuck their elbows in. From the back row, I caught a tiny scene that didn't belong to me, the judge's gaze drifting again softer at the edges. It was there and gone in the space of a breath, small enough to miss if you weren't looking for the currents beneath a calm surface. I didn't know what it meant yet. I just underlined a word on my pad history. We moved through preliminary motions like stones across a river, secure footing, quick hops. Each time Ariana spoke, she trimmed away everything extra. Each time Damon shifted the room, felt a fraction more alert to the weight of his presence, the sound of his breathing, the way he occupied space that didn't belong to him alone. When the judge called a short pause to address a scheduling note, the sound in the room didn't relax. It pressed in. People weren't bored. They were bracing. Damon's lawyer leaned in for a huddle. Ariana stood alone, eyes on her notes, thumb resting on silver. I've covered 100 hearings where the drama came from noise, shouting, pounding theatrics. This one drew its gravity from restraint, from a woman who wouldn't let a slur drag her into the mud, from a judge who kept his robe between himself and something that tugged at him anyway, from a cop who believed the room belonged to him and was about to learn that it didn't. When we resumed, the geometry of the moment sharpened. 3 points on a triangle, Damon, square-jawed and pleased with himself. Ariana steady as a plumb line. Judge Ellington face unreadable knuckles pale around the gavel. You could feel the lines connecting them pulled tight as wire. That was the promise of the morning, not a fight thrown in alleys or shouted into cameras, but a collision inside the quietest room in America. And if you'd asked me right then where it would break, I would have said exactly what I wrote at the bottom of my notes. 3 forces, 1 room. Something has to give. By the time the second day of testimony began, you could feel the strain in that room like a violin string, pulled a note too high but not yet broken. Sergeant Damon Harlow couldn't keep still. He leaned forward in his chair, arms crossed, the same smirk on his face. When Ariana Brooks stood to question a witness, he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for people nearby to hear, "Women like you shouldn't touch the badge, let alone the law." A 2-for-1 insult, race and gender wrapped in one sentence. A few jurors shifted. One middle-aged white woman on the panel lowered her eyes, embarrassed for everyone there. The rest pretended they hadn't heard, as if silence could wash it away. Ariana didn't rise to the bait. She straightened a sheet of paper, smoothed her sleeve, and kept speaking with that same controlled, deliberate tone. Her restraint was louder than any outburst. She presented photographs, reports, and statements, her voice never trembling. Damon's jaw worked, muscles jumping under the skin, but he couldn't find a single flaw to strike back at. Sergeant Harlow filed 2 versions of his report, she said. One, the night of the arrest, and another the next morning. Which one is the truth? The defense lawyer objected. The judge sustained. The jury still heard every word. Behind the bench, Judge Marcus Ellington looked carved from stone. But under that stillness, his fingers tightened around the wooden gavel until the knuckles whitened. He wasn't reacting as a judge now. For a heartbeat, he looked like a man fighting to keep a secret buried under his own robe. The witness finished. The judge called for a short recess. Chairs scraped, people stretched, whispered. Devin Hale, the young man Ariana defended, leaned toward her as deputies escorted him past the defense table. His voice was barely air. "You're the only one who ever believed me." She gave the smallest nod. No grand gestures, no soft music, just a look that said, "I still do." At the back of the courtroom, Malcolm Ray had been writing faster than anyone realized. The reporter in him lived for these small tremors that shook the mask off a system. He caught a flicker of movement, Damon turning to his fellow officer, lips curling. "Let her talk," Damon whispered. "The more she talks, the more she hangs herself." Malcolm didn't record it. He'd learned not to wave a phone when uniforms were near, but he wrote it down in block letters, "Let her talk." Then he drew a small line under it. Intuition told him this trial wasn't about one broken rib. It was about a country's breaking point. The break ended. Everyone filed back in. The gavel struck once sharp, cold final. Ariana rose again. Damon's eyes tracked her like crosshairs. For a moment, the entire courtroom felt smaller, like the air had drawn tight between those two people. She resumed her questions. He whispered something else, almost a growl. She didn't flinch. Each piece of evidence she introduced was another turn of the screw, pressing him further against his own lies. The defense lawyer kept objecting, but the rhythm of her calm made him sound frantic. I looked at the judge, then really looked. Sweated his temple jaw, set eyes flicking to her and away again, as if afraid of what he'd see if he let himself look too long. I didn't know their history yet, but I knew that expression, a man caught between duty and conscience. When Ariana finished for the day, she gathered her notes in silence. Damon sat stiff pretending victory, but the vein at his neck beat too fast. The jurors watched both of them caught between sympathy and fear. The judge stood. Court will adjourn until tomorrow. For a second, no one moved. Then the shuffle of papers, the echo of heels, the metallic click of Damon's badge against the desk, ordinary sounds returning after tension breaks. As Ariana turned to leave, she caught the judge's gaze. Not long, not tender. Just a flash of recognition, one human to another, before he looked away and reached for his gavel again, as if hiding behind it. That moment said more than any verdict could. They both knew the same truth. It wasn't just the case on trial anymore. It was courage itself under the gavel. They called a 15-minute recess, but it felt like the air had been holding its breath for an hour. I stayed behind in the hallway, notebook half closed, when I heard it, Damon's voice carrying just far enough to sting. "She'll crack soon," he said, low and certain, like a man who believed the system itself wore his badge. The deputies laughed. The sound slid under the door of the small anteroom where Ariana sat alone. Inside, the fluorescent light buzzed. Ariana had taken off her heels and was staring at the mirror above the sink. Her makeup had smudged, not from tears, she hadn't given him that, but from the hours of keeping her face calm while a man tried to provoke her. The faint scar along her left cheek caught the light. I'd never noticed it before. It looked old, healed, but not forgotten. She pressed her palm flat to the counter and whispered almost to the mirror, "What's the point of fighting a system built to break you?" The words weren't defeat. They were the quiet before a decision. Outside, Malcolm Ray lingered near the door with his recorder tucked in his pocket. He'd caught Damon's boast and hit record just in time, but a courthouse guard spotted him. "No recordings during recess," the man barked, hand out. Malcolm hesitated. He threatened counsel, "Delete it." The officer's stare left no room for argument. With a small sigh, Malcolm erased the clip, watching the red light blink out. The machine obeyed, the system protected itself. Back inside, Ariana splashed water on her face, letting the cold bite her skin. For a moment, her reflection blurred, and it wasn't the mirror fogging, it was memory. She was 12 again, standing on the other side of a visitation window. Her mother, dark-skinned, tired, still beautiful, sat in a prison jumpsuit the color of ash. She reached for the glass, voice low and steady. "Don't let their silence define you, baby." "You hear me?" Young Ariana nodded, pressing her small hand where her mother's palm met the glass. The guards called time. The memory ended with that sound, a buzzer, final and sharp. When the present came rushing back, Ariana was breathing slower. She wiped her face with a paper towel, picked up her files, and looked at the mirror one more time. The scar didn't look like weakness now. It looked like proof. The hallway was still buzzing when she opened the door. Damon turned just enough to see her pass. He smirked, waiting for a reaction. He didn't get one. She walked by him like he was part of the furniture. The laughter behind her faltered. Malcolm caught her eye as she passed. She gave him a nod, half gratitude, half warning not to get involved, and disappeared down the corridor toward the courtroom. He watched her go, then glanced through the window at the judge's chambers across the way. Through the glass, Judge Marcus Ellington stood, arms folded behind his back, staring down at the lobby below. He could see her, though she didn't know it. For a moment, the gavel on his desk looked heavier than it should have. He turned it once in his hand, then set it down carefully as if it might explode. That's when I realized the story wasn't just about one corrupt officer or one fearless attorney. It was about every person in that courthouse, their lines, their choices, their silences. Ariana reached the courtroom door and paused. The noise of the crowd outside was muffled, distant applause, anger, gossip, all mixed together. She took one deep breath and whispered something to herself I couldn't hear. Then she pushed the door open and walked back inside. The gust from the hallway caught a stack of papers on the clerk's desk. They fluttered, then settled again. The sound was small, but it filled the space like a whisper turning into wind. From where I sat, it felt as if the building itself was listening, waiting for the next crack to appear. Not in her, but in the system she just decided to break. By noon, the courtroom had thinned out half the seats, empty, the smell of coffee still hanging in the air. People spoke in low tones, pretending things had settled. It was that kind of silence that only comes before something breaks. Ariana stood at the front, adjusting the projector. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "the defense would like to submit a video recording taken from the convenience store's exterior camera. It shows Sergeant Harlow engaging with my client." Every head turned toward the screen. The footage began grainy but clear enough. You could see Damon's frame broad and certain grabbing Devon Hale by the collar, shoving him hard against a patrol car. Devon's hands were already cuffed. Damon's voice cut across the playback. "That's a damn lie." The words cracked through the quiet like gunfire. He slammed both hands on the table and stood jaw-pulsing, eyes wild. Ariana barely had time to turn before he started toward her. "Sergeant, return to your seat," Judge Marcus barked, bringing the gavel down once. But Damon wasn't listening. The man who thought himself untouchable crossed the room in 3 strides and shoved Ariana back against the evidence table. Papers exploded into the air, white confetti of chaos. Gasps rose. A chair scraped. Someone shouted, "Get him off her!" 2 bailiffs lunged, catching Damon by the arms, but he thrashed like an animal. "She provoked me," he roared. "She called me a liar." Ariana stumbled, one hand gripping the table's edge. Blood touched her lip. She straightened slowly, eyes locking on Damon's. Her voice was quiet, steady. "You just proved my case." The entire room froze. It wasn't defiance in her tone, it was fact. Cold, sharp, undeniable. The bailiffs wrestled Damon toward the door, his voice still echoing down the hall. "You don't know who you're messing with." Malcolm from the gallery didn't move. His camera kept rolling. The lens caught it all, her blood, her poise, the disbelief rippling through the crowd. The shot was harsh, light pouring in from the windows, but somehow it made her look unbreakable. Judge Marcus rose halfway from his chair, instinct flashing across his face, fear, fury, something deeper, but he stopped himself. His hand trembled on the gavel. To act now would expose everything. He stayed still, half standing, a man split clean down the middle. Ariana turned slightly, eyes wet but fierce. She gathered her papers from the floor, each movement deliberate. Around her, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. "Did that just happen?" He hit her. In front of the judge, the noise grew, then died again as she faced the bench. "Your Honor," she said, voice hoarse but unshaken, "the video speaks for itself. So does Sergeant Harlow." Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came. He nodded once, emotion as small as it was heavy. "Court will recess," he managed finally, voice breaking at the edge. As the bailiffs dragged Damon out, Ariana stayed where she was, blood drying at the corner of her mouth. The late sunlight streamed through the tall windows, washing over her in quiet gold. She didn't smile, didn't move, just stood there, framed in that light. Malcolm lowered his camera. No need to check the footage. The story was already written: a cop who couldn't hide behind authority anymore, and a woman who turned an attack into evidence. The hum of voices rose again, reporters rushing to phones, jurors whispering behind hands, deputies exchanging tight looks. But all of it faded as Ariana walked out steady, her shadow stretching long behind her across the courtroom floor. If you'd been there, you'd remember the silence more than the noise. Because in that silence, every person in that room understood the moment he struck her, he didn't just attack a lawyer, he hit the heart of the law itself. And for the first time, the system flinched. By noon, the courtroom had thinned out, half the seats empty, the smell of coffee still hanging in the air. People spoke in low tones, pretending things had settled. It was that kind of silence that only comes before something breaks. Ariana stood at the front, adjusting the projector. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "the defense would like to submit a video recording taken from the convenience store's exterior camera. It shows Sergeant Harlow engaging with my client." Every head turned toward the screen. The footage began grainy but clear enough. You could see Damon's frame broad and certain grabbing Devon Hale by the collar, shoving him hard against a patrol car. Devon's hands were already cuffed. Damon's voice cut across the playback. "That's a damn lie." The words cracked through the quiet like gunfire. He slammed both hands on the table and stood jaw-pulsing, eyes wild. Ariana barely had time to turn before he started toward her. "Sergeant, return to your seat," Judge Marcus barked, bringing the gavel down once. But Damon wasn't listening. The man who thought himself untouchable crossed the room in 3 strides and shoved Ariana back against the evidence table. Papers exploded into the air, white confetti of chaos. Gasps rose. A chair scraped. Someone shouted, "Get him off her." 2 bailiffs lunged, catching Damon by the arms, but he thrashed like an animal. "She provoked me," he roared. "She called me a liar." Ariana stumbled, one hand gripping the table's edge. Blood touched her lip. She straightened slowly, eyes locking on Damon's. Her voice was quiet, steady. "You just proved my case." The entire room froze. It wasn't defiance in her tone, it was fact. Cold, sharp, undeniable. The bailiffs wrestled Damon toward the door, his voice still echoing down the hall. "You don't know who you're messing with." Malcolm from the gallery didn't move. His camera kept rolling. The lens caught it all, her blood, her poise, the disbelief rippling through the crowd. The shot was harsh light pouring in from the windows, but somehow it made her look unbreakable. Judge Marcus rose halfway from his chair, instinct flashing across his face. Fear, fury, something deeper, but he stopped himself. His hand trembled on the gavel. To act now would expose everything. He stayed still, half standing, a man split clean down the middle. Ariana turned slightly, eyes wet but fierce. She gathered her papers from the floor, each movement deliberate. Around her, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Did that just happen? He hit her. In front of the judge, the noise grew, then died again as she faced the bench. Your Honor, she said, voice hoarse, but unshaken. The video speaks for itself. So does Sergeant Harlow. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came. He nodded once, a motion as small as it was heavy. Court will recess, he managed finally, voice breaking at the edge. As the bailiffs dragged Damon out, Ariana stayed where she was, blood drying at the corner of her mouth. The late sunlight streamed through the tall windows, washing over her in quiet gold. She didn't smile, didn't move, just stood there, framed in that light. Malcolm lowered his camera. No need to check the footage. The story was already written, a cop who couldn't hide behind authority anymore, and a woman who turned an attack into evidence. The hum of voices rose again, reporters rushing to phones, jurors whispering behind hands, deputies exchanging tight looks. But all of it faded as Ariana walked out steady, her shadow stretching long behind her across the courtroom floor. If you'd been there, you'd remember the silence more than the noise. Because in that silence, every person in that room understood the moment he struck her. He didn't just attack a lawyer, he hit the heart of the law itself. And for the first time, the system flinched. By the time the lunch break ended, the courtroom had that false calm you get right before a storm. Half the benches were empty. Sunlight sliding in through the high windows, cutting sharp lines across the floor. People chatted softly, trying to pretend things were normal. Then Ariana Brooks stepped to the front with her laptop and a stack of evidence. Your Honor, she said, steady as stone, this video was recovered from the store's surveillance camera. It shows what happened between Sergeant Harlow and my client Devin Hale. The screen came alive. Grainy footage, shaky but clear enough to see Damon's heavy frame. Devin's wrists already cuffed the sudden shove that sent him against the patrol car. The sound of Damon's voice, angry loud, filled the room. That's a damn lie, Damon shouted. He was on his feet before anyone breathed. Sergeant, return to your seat, Judge Marcus barked from the bench. The gavel hit wood once sharp. Damon didn't listen. He crossed the space in 3 strides, grabbed the edge of Ariana's lectern and shoved it hard. She stumbled back into the evidence table. Files, scattered binders hit the floor, and a metal pen tray clattered like a gunshot. She provoked me, he shouted, his face, red veins standing out on his neck. She's twisting everything. 2 deputies lunged. They caught his arms, dragged him back. The courtroom became a wall of noise, gasps, shouts, chairs scraping. Ariana straightened slowly, one hand pressed to the corner of her mouth where blood had bloomed. She looked at him, calm, measured, and said in a voice that cut through everything, "You just proved my case." And just like that, the noise died. You could have heard the hum of the lights. Damon froze between the deputies, his chest rising fast, eyes darting. Ariana didn't blink. Her words hung there heavier than the gavel itself. From the back row, Malcolm Ray's camera light glowed red. He'd caught every second. Through the lens, Ariana's face looked almost unreal. Blood, poise, fire, all mixed together. Judge Marcus half rose from his chair, a father's instinct flickering in his eyes. But he stopped. He gripped the gavel tight enough to shake. The robe still protected him, but barely. He couldn't cross that line without losing everything. Court will recess, he managed, voice rough. Remove the sergeant from the premises. The deputies dragged Damon out. He was still shouting something about respect, about being set up, but the sound faded down the hallway. The heavy door shut behind him with a thud. Ariana stood alone at the front of the room. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, gathered her papers one by one, and stacked them neatly again. The gesture was so ordinary, so human, it almost broke the spell. Light poured in behind her, catching the edges of her suit and hair, turning her silhouette gold. She didn't smile, didn't bow. She just walked out slowly, the crowd parting in silence. Malcolm lowered his camera, whispering to himself, "That's not just news, that's history." And he was right. Because in that moment, the story stopped being about a cop and a lawyer. It became something bigger, a reckoning written in blood and calm under the eyes of the law. It was well past midnight when the courthouse finally emptied. Up on the top floor, a single light still burned behind the frosted glass of Judge Marcus Ellington's office. I could see it from the street, steady, sleepless, the kind of light that doesn't go out because something inside a man refuses to. Inside, Marcus sat at his desk, glasses set aside, papers spread like fallen leaves. The window was cracked open, letting in the hum of Atlanta's night. The smell of rain drifted in with the city's low murmur. He held an old wooden frame in his hand, the glass slightly chipped. In the photo, a younger version of himself, a woman with kind, tired eyes, and a little girl with her mother's curls and his jawline. The frame trembled between his fingers. "I once believed the law could erase color," he whispered to no one. "I was wrong. It erased my soul instead." He leaned back, eyes fixed somewhere that wasn't the room anymore. And then the years peeled away. It was 1,992 again. Marcus was barely 30 robes, too big for his shoulders, but pride filling the space where courage should have been. Lydia Brooks had been his world, a black activist who spoke like fire but loved with gentleness. She'd led marches, carried signs that said equal justice, no exceptions. And he told himself he could change the system from the inside. But when Lydia was arrested at a protest gone violent, the same system he served turned on her. The charges were inflated, the witnesses shaky, the intent obvious. They wanted a symbol, someone to silence. Marcus had sat through that trial on the bench beside older judges, pretending neutrality while his chest screamed. He knew the truth. He also knew what it would cost to say it. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, Lydia had turned her head, met his eyes, and smiled. "Don't let them own you," she'd said, as deputies led her away. He hadn't answered. 3 months later, Lydia Brooks was dead. Suicide, the papers called it. Marcus never read past the headline. He'd already buried something deeper than her body. That night, back in the present, he reached for a drawer and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. The headline was yellowed now, the ink faint. Below it, a small photo of Lydia, her eyes still burning, even in black and white. He pressed the clipping against the desk, exhaling hard. 20 years of silence, 20 years of pretending the girl he sent to boarding school in Boston was just a niece. He'd signed every tuition check as Uncle Marcus, convinced it was protection. But the truth was simpler. He'd been afraid. Afraid of the stares, of the whispers, of being the judge who fathered a black child with a woman the system destroyed. And now that same daughter had walked into his courtroom, confident, relentless, unstoppable, and forced him to look in the mirror he'd been avoiding. Ariana Brooks didn't just resemble her mother. She carried her like an echo. Every argument, every calm defiance, every wound hidden under silence, it was Lydia's voice coming back through her. Marcus opened a leather notebook, the one he kept locked beneath his files. His hands shook as he wrote, "Tomorrow I tell the truth. No more hiding." He read it twice. The words looked smaller than they felt. Then he closed the book, placed it neatly beside the framed photo, and exhaled through his nose like a man walking towards something heavy but necessary. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. He stood, turned off the desk lamp, and reached for the gavel lying by his papers. He ran his thumb along the smooth wood, then tapped it lightly on the desk, once, twice, 3 times. Each strike echoed through the empty office like a heartbeat. Not judgment, not law, conscience. The light went out, but for a long while after, the sound of those 3 strikes still hung in the dark. The rain had been falling for hours, the kind that drowned out your thoughts if you let it. From the street, the courthouse looked like a fortress under siege, its windows glowing faintly through the storm. A few blocks away, inside a small law office with paper-strewn desks and a flickering lamp, Ariana Brooks was still awake. Her jacket hung on the back of the chair, soaked at the cuffs. Files covered every inch of the table. Photos, transcripts, printouts of the video stills. The desk lamp cast a harsh circle of light that turned her exhaustion into something sharp. Her eyes were rimmed red, but there was no quit in them. The phone rang once, then again. She hesitated before answering. Brooks. The voice on the other end was low, detached, and colder than the rain. "If you show that video tomorrow, you won't leave the courthouse alive." A click, then silence. For a few seconds, she didn't move. The hum of the lamp was the only sound left. Her hand tightened around the phone until her knuckles went white. Then she set it down carefully, reached into her drawer, and pulled out a small recorder. She pressed record and spoke, her tone barely above a whisper. "If they silence me, my voice will still echo in this courtroom." From the hallway outside, a shadow moved, Judge Marcus Ellington. He'd come to check on her, maybe to find words, maybe to offer something like comfort. Instead, he froze just beyond the doorway. He heard her voice, that calm defiance, and it broke him. The tears came slow, soaking through his shirt before he could wipe them away. He'd already lost the woman who taught him courage. Now he was watching his daughter live it. A knock on the glass startled them both. The door creaked open, and Malcolm Ray stepped in, dripping rain onto the floor. His camera bag was slung across his shoulder, his face drawn tight from the cold. In his hand, a small black USB drive. "This is the full footage," he said, voice low but sure. "Raw. Untouched. I lost my job for this." Ariana looked up at him, something flickering in her eyes, gratitude maybe, or the calm that comes when a decision's already made. "Then let's make it worth it," she said. Malcolm nodded once. No speeches, no handshake. He just set the drive on her desk and backed away. She plugged it in. The screen lit up, blue light cutting through the room. There it was again, the video. The shove, the fall, the blood. The gavel slamming. The chaos that followed. Every frame was a mirror held up to the truth. She leaned closer, watching herself take the hit again, watching Damon's rage freeze her midair. It was strange, she thought, to see her own pain as evidence. To know that the only way to win was to relive it. Marcus still stood at the door, one hand on the frame. He wanted to step in to tell her not to go through with it, to beg her to run. But he knew she wouldn't. And for the first time he understood that she'd inherited not just Lydia's courage, but her fate. A flash of lightning hit outside, and for a heartbeat the room went white. When the light faded, Ariana was still there, face illuminated by the screen. Her reflection merged with Damon's frozen image, two figures bound by violence and truth, separated by justice's thin line. The rain kept pounding the storm, unrelenting. Ariana reached out, paused the frame, and whispered, "Tomorrow." Then she turned off the lamp. The room went dark except for the soft glow of the monitor, her face, and Damon side by side, flickering in blue. The rain's rhythm filled the silence, steady and merciless, like the countdown to a verdict that could no longer be stopped. By morning, the building felt different, charged, crowded, humming like a power line. Reporters stacked 2 deep along the hallway, microphones blooming like metal flowers. Inside the courtroom, every seat was taken, and the air held that sharp, antiseptic brightness you only get when the sun hits polished wood and glass. The witness stand seemed to glow under the white lights, a stage waiting for a confession. The doors opened, and Sergeant Damon Harlow walked in like the star of a ceremony built for him. No uniform today, navy suit, crisp shirt, a tie the color of wet asphalt. He carried himself with manufactured calm chin, high eyes, sweeping the room as if to count his audience. When his gaze slid over Ariana Brooks, it held a second too long. The old contempt was there, but underneath it, I saw something new, a pulse of worry knocking at his temple. Fear knows how to hide. It just doesn't know how to sit still. Ariana rose before the clerk could finish the formalities. "Your Honor," she said, voice, "even new evidence has surfaced. No wind-up, no theatrics." She nodded once toward the screen at the front of the room. The projector flickered to life. Grain bled across the image, then sharpened. There it was, the moment the city had argued about for a week, without the full truth in view. Damon striding forward. Ariana turning. The shove. The table. The shock. Judge Marcus Ellington's gavel hammering the desk, while the room came apart around him. No one breathed. You could hear the faint whir of the projector's fan. In the second row, a juror pressed a hand to her throat. On the aisle, a deputy's eyes narrowed as if the facts had insulted him personally. "That's a damn lie." Damon exploded, color rising from his collar into his face. His lawyer lurched to his feet. Objection, but the words sounded timid against the fact of the footage. Damon doubled down, voice cracking with heat. "That video's fake." Ariana didn't look at the judge, didn't look at the jury. She turned to Damon, just him, and spoke with the type of precision that makes people sit up straighter. "No, Sergeant. You serve your fear, not the law." It felt like the ceiling lowered an inch. A sentence that short shouldn't weigh that much, but truth is heavy when it lands. Somewhere behind me, a reporter's pen stopped moving. Malcolm Ray's camera snapped twice, click, click, like the sound of a verdict. Damon's hand drifted toward his chest, found the badge pinned to his lapel like a comfort charm. His fingers closed over it, pressing hard. He was still talking, swearing he'd never touch a woman, swearing she'd started it, swearing the city was out to get him. But his eyes told another story. They skittered left, right, down, everywhere except the screen, freezing his rage in place. On the bench, Judge Ellington didn't move, but the storm inside him showed at the edges. The lines around his mouth went taut. A bead of sweat traced the hinge of his jaw. Watching the attack replayed with the entire country as witness, he looked like a man caught between two trials, one public, one private, each demanding a different verdict. "Members of the jury," Ariana resumed, "you will see the defendant initiate force while the attorney is presenting evidence. You will also hear his voice after the incident, His own admissions recorded lawfully by an officer's body mic left running. The audio is time-stamped and unaltered. Her words did not rise, they stacked. A careful building you couldn't push over without knocking down the rulebook with it. Malcolm moved along the back wall camera, steady breathing, measured. He wasn't chasing chaos now. He was preserving stillness, the particular kind that settles on a room when people realize there's nowhere left for a lie to go. Damon tugged once at his tie, then again tighter, as if he could anchor himself to the knot. "You're railroading me," he spat at Ariana. "You think that robe is going to save you?" No answer. She kept her eyes level and her hands at her sides. One knuckle was scabbed from catching the table edge during the shove. It looked small and human, in all that polished wood and legal Latin. The judge leaned into his microphone. "Sergeant Harlow, you will address the court through counsel." His voice had gravel in it. Discipline over thunder. Damon laughed, once short, brittle, then threw the line that changed the air in the room. "Does your father know who you've become?" The sentence lodged in the silence like a nail. Heads turned first to Ariana, then to the bench, then back again. I felt the hair lift on my arms. He meant it as a taunt, but it landed like a flare in a dark field, lighting up everything we hadn't been brave enough to see. Ariana went still, not shocked, more like braced. The judge's face lost a shade of color. For a heartbeat, I thought he might stand, rip the robe from his shoulders, and let the world see the man under it. Instead, his hand found the gavel and held on. "Counsel," he said to Ariana, voice steady by force alone, "you may proceed." She nodded once and turned back to the screen. "The video will be entered as Exhibit 31. The audio will be 32. Her tone did what the room could not. It moved forward. On the side aisle, a woman whispered, "Oh my God," and covered her mouth. A man next to her put a hand on her sleeve without taking his eyes off the front. Damon's lawyer tried to rally something about chain of custody, something about compression artifacts, but it sounded like a man reading instructions to a house already on fire. The jury wasn't looking at him anyway. They were watching a badge tremble under a shaking hand, and a woman refused to shake at all. I glanced at Malcolm. He was focused and very still, camera to eye, mask off. Not the mask he wore to be objective, the one we all pretend exists, but the other mask, the one that keeps a person from feeling too much on the job. He'd let it slip. What we were seeing was the thing he'd lost employment for and maybe sleep for. Truth turned into evidence. Judge Ellington cleared his throat. The sound was small and human and somehow louder than the gavel. "The exhibits are admitted," he said. "The jury will consider the weight to give them." And just like that, the gears engaged again. The machine of the court moved on. But nobody in that room believed we were back to ordinary business. We were past the point of pretending. Damon's jab about a father had cracked something open. You could feel it like a draft slipping under a door you thought was sealed. Ariana didn't look toward the bench. Neither did I. Some truths announce themselves before anyone says them out loud. The question was no longer whether the room would face them. It was how long the people in it could keep from speaking. When the judge called a short recess, no one stood right away. They sat with it, the image, the sentence, the implication, like a weight set in the middle of the floor that everyone had to walk around to leave. Damon stared at the carpet. Ariana closed her file palms flat on the cover. The judge's eyes fixed on the far wall, seeing something only he could see. And me, I wrote a single line across a clean page, truth on the screen. A dare in the room. Nothing left to hide. It happened so fast that even the cameras couldn't keep up. Damon's voice cracked through the chaos like thunder. "She's your daughter, Judge Ellington. The whole damn country should know what kind of justice this is." The words hit the room like a bomb. Gasps. Murmurs. Then shouting. The sound rolled through the courtroom in waves, reporters scrambling for their phones, jurors whispering, bailiffs yelling for order. The truth had finally torn through the walls. Ariana froze. Her face went white, her breath caught halfway to breaking. For a long, unbearable second, she didn't move, only the faint tremor of her hands betrayed her. Marcus slammed the gavel so hard it echoed against the marble walls. "Order," he barked. "This courtroom will have order," but the noise only thickened. People weren't just watching a trial anymore, they were watching a reckoning. The judge rose from his chair. Slowly, deliberately. The robe, once a symbol of control, now looked heavy enough to crush him. He took a breath that sounded like it hurt. Then his voice, low, steady, but trembling underneath, cut through the noise. "For years I've hidden behind this robe," he said. "Today I won't." The room fell silent. Even Damon stopped struggling. Marcus looked straight at him, eyes burning with something past anger. "You talk about the law, Sergeant," he said, "yet you broke its soul. Justice is not a shield for hate. The line landed with the weight of a verdict. Damon's mouth opened, but no words came out. His shoulders sagged, the fight gone. The man who'd walked in untouchable now looked smaller, stripped bare under the truth. Marcus turned to the court, his voice softer now, but no less firm. Today, he said, I am not your judge. I am a father who failed justice. The words hung there raw and final. No one dared to move. Then something remarkable happened. One of the jurors, an older woman in a blue cardigan, stood up and placed her hand over her heart. Another followed, then another. No one told them to. It wasn't applause. It was reverence, the quiet kind, reserved for moments when the truth finally speaks. Ariana's eyes filled, but she didn't hide it. The tears weren't shame, they were release. For the first time, she saw her father not as the man who had abandoned her, but as the man brave enough to stop running. The cameras clicked again, flashes bursting like lightning. But what they captured wasn't scandal. It was something holy. Damon bowed his head. His hands hung loose at his sides. Whatever defense he thought he had died in that silence. Judge Marcus Ellington lifted the gavel one last time. His eyes found Ariana's for a heartbeat, a look that said, I'm sorry and I'm proud and I should have done this years ago. Then he struck the desk. Once. Twice. A third time. The sound rolled through the chamber like thunder, fading into prayer. And when it ended, no one clapped, no one shouted. They just sat there knowing they had witnessed something bigger than guilt or innocence. It wasn't a verdict. It was redemption spoken in wood and echo. A week later, the courthouse looked different. The crowds were gone. The marble floors gleamed again, empty and quiet. Sunlight poured through the high windows, soft and golden, like the city itself was finally breathing out. The news had broken that morning. Sergeant Damon Harlow convicted of assault, stripped of his badge. No dramatic headlines, no outrage. Just the facts. The anchors read them calmly, their voices low. Justice had come, but not with fireworks, just silence. The kind that stays. Marcus Ellington stepped out of the courthouse one last time. His black robe was folded over his arm. Reporters swarmed microphones, raised questions overlapping. He didn't stop walking until he reached the steps, the same steps where hundreds had once shouted for justice. Then he turned, met the sea of lenses and flashing lights, and said only one line, the law must be colorblind. But first, its keepers must have sight. He didn't take questions. He didn't need to. That sentence was all he had left to give. The next day, every network wanted Ariana Brooks. They wanted her face on the news, her story on camera, her voice, to fill the gap that silence had left. She declined them all. When Malcolm found her at her office, she was boxing up files, one hand resting on that old silver pendant. He asked gently why she wouldn't speak. She looked up at him and said, "Justice doesn't need my face. It needs our courage." Malcolm didn't argue. He just nodded. Then he pulled a small hard drive from his bag, the one that had nearly cost him everything, and uploaded the uncut footage to his channel. No edits, no commentary, no dramatic music. Just the truth, raw and still. Within days, it spread everywhere. Not because of outrage, not because people wanted to pick sides, but because it showed something rare, a woman standing in the middle of chaos, calm, bleeding, unbroken. A man stripped of authority by his own violence. A father choosing truth over power. The comments weren't loud, they were reverent. Finally, about time. And one that lingered beneath them all, this is what justice should look like. A week later, before the next case began, Ariana returned to the courtroom. No cameras this time, no reporters, just her. The room was exactly as it had been, but emptier somehow. The air carried memory like perfume. She walked to the bench, the echo of her heels soft against the marble. The gavel, her father's gavel, rested on the desk. She reached out and placed her hand on it, palm steady. The wood was cool, smooth, familiar. For a long time she didn't move. The only sound was the steady tick of the courtroom clock. One beat, then another. And for the first time since the verdict, she smiled, not wide, not triumphant, but small and sure. The voice that had guided us through this story came in softly, almost like a whisper from the walls themselves. In that courtroom, silence wasn't surrender. It was power. And justice for once spoke without a sound. Ariana turned toward the door. The morning sun had found its way through the tall windows, spilling across the floor in streaks of light. It followed her as she walked out, her figure framed in gold. Outside, the city kept moving, cars passing, people talking, life carrying on. But in that room, the light stayed a little longer, Because sometimes justice doesn't roar, it dawns quietly. And that's where this story leaves us, with truth standing quietly where chaos once was. Sometimes justice doesn't shout, it whispers, and those who listen help carry it forward. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who believes in fairness, courage, and second chances. And if you'd like to hear more stories that speak from the heart, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories. Your support means more than numbers. It's the reason our team keeps creating meaningful stories that remind us what humanity can still be. This is Mr. Max Stories, where truth always finds its voice even in silence.